At 91, Pat Boone, she was the love of my life. At 91 years old, Pat Boone just made history on the Billboard charts again. Not in 1957. Not in 1962. In 2025. His new anthem, One E Voices for Tanzania, debuted on the adult contemporary airplay chart, placing him alongside artists like Sabrina Carpenter and Teddy Swims. That means his name has appeared on that chart from its very first edition in 1961 all the way to today, a span no other artist can claim. And just months later, he stepped onto a stage in Illinois with his daughter Debbie for what fans called a once-in-a-lifetime evening. But behind every headline, every chart position, and every performance, there is one name he keeps returning to. Shirley. The woman he met when he was 16. The woman he never stopped loving. And the woman he lost in 2019. This is the story of Pat Boone, the man America thought it knew, and the life he built with the love he never got over. Pat Boone came into the world on June 1, 1934 in Jacksonville, Florida. His parents had been expecting a girl and were all set to name the baby Patricia. Instead, they got a boy, but the nickname stayed anyway. So Charles Eugene Boone became Pat Boone almost by accident. Long before fame arrived, that name was already doing something. It was memorable. It had a ring to it. And when his clean-cut image took over radio, television, and film, it all felt less like something manufactured and more like a story that had quietly started the day he was born. When he was just 2 years old, his family moved to Nashville, and that move shaped everything. He grew up in a city where music lived in churches, on radio stations, and in every school event that mattered. By 12, he was already performing in public. By high school, he was student body president, baseball team captain, and voted most popular boy while also hosting a teen talent show on local radio. This was not a boy waiting for his moment. He was already building it. What made that rise even more striking was how plain his family background really was. His father worked as a contractor. His mother was a registered nurse. There was no industry connection, no hidden shortcut, no glamour waiting at the door. Pat Boone stepped out of a hard-working American home and built the spotlight around himself. That contrast became part of his appeal. He looked polished, but his roots were ordinary enough for people to trust him completely. Then there was the Boone name itself, tied in the public imagination to Daniel Boone, the frontier legend. Whether the genealogical line was direct or not, the effect was the same. It gave him history before he had even made any of his own. And that kind of thing matters when a public figure is being formed. He met Shirley Foley at 16, at school, while she was speaking to his coach. He asked to be introduced. The attraction landed on both of them immediately. He later said they were holding hands the very first time they met. And for 9 full months after that, they did not kiss. Pat said he held back on purpose. He did not want the relationship to become shallow. He wanted it to mean something more. Then after a school hayride, the long wait finally ended. And Shirley's response, after all that time, was that she had expected more. That small detail gives the whole story a very human warmth. Shirley was not just any girl from school. She was the daughter of Red Foley, one of the biggest names in country music at the time, the man behind songs like Chattanooga Shoe Shine Boy and Peace in the Valley. Falling for Shirley meant stepping into a family that already understood fame from the inside. When Shirley's family planned to move, Pat did not wait. At 19, he walked straight up to Red Foley and asked for his daughter's hand. According to Pat, Red agreed and even helped with the rings. That is not a teenage gesture. That is a man who had already decided. In November 1953, they eloped. Both 19. Both still figuring out what adult life even looked like. And within 5 years, they had 4 daughters, Cherry, Lindy, Debbie, and Lori. While Pat was finishing his degree at Columbia University and performing across the country, Shirley was raising one child after another in the middle of a life that never slowed down. He graduated magna cum laude in 1958. She made that possible by holding everything together at home. Meanwhile, the music was exploding. By the mid-1950s, Pat Boone had signed with Dot Records and scored a major breakout with a cover of Fats Domino's Ain't That a Shame. Then came his version of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti, which sold over 1 million copies. Billboard data later placed him second only to Elvis Presley among the top artists of that era. That number still feels almost impossible when you consider his image: polished, gentle, family-friendly, and calm. While other stars sold rebellion, Boone sold restraint. And America bought it in enormous numbers. But that success carried real weight. Little Richard's originals were wild, electric, and full of dangerous energy. Boone's versions filtered that fire into something conservative radio and white family living rooms would welcome. Some white families reportedly kept Little Richard's records hidden while Boone sat out in plain view. The original black artists created the sound, while smoother white versions often received more airplay, more money, and more mainstream acceptance. Little Richard never hid his feelings about it. That tension never fully disappeared from Pat Boone's story. To some, he was a bridge to black music. To others, he was a filter that blocked the real thing. At just 23, Boone began hosting the Pat Boone Chevy Showroom on national television, 115 episodes that turned him from a radio voice into a face in living rooms across America. In 1957, his recording of April Love reached #1 and earned an Academy Award nomination. He refused to kiss his co-star on screen. That moment became major news, not because it was scandalous, but because it proved his moral code was not just an image. He meant it. Hollywood loved him and could not quite contain him at the same time. Then in 1997, something strange happened. Pat Boone walked onto the American Music Awards stage dressed in black leather, metal studs, and fake tattoos to promote his album in a metal mood, No More Mr. Nice Guy. His Christian audience felt blindsided. Trinity Broadcasting pulled his gospel program after viewers flooded the network with complaints. What looked like a goofy publicity move became a real wound inside the very community that had defended him for decades. What almost nobody knew at the time was that behind the scenes, his relationship with that album was far more personal than it seemed. Because one of those metal songs, Crazy Train, originally by Ozzy Osbourne, ended up connecting him to a friendship that would last the rest of Ozzy's life. Osbourne and his family lived next door to Pat Boone in Beverly Hills for a couple of years, and the two men became genuine friends. Sharon Osbourne later chose Boone's jazzy cover of Crazy Train as the opening theme of the hit reality show The Osbournes. Ozzy reportedly told interviewers that Pat Boone was the best neighbor he had ever had because he was the only one who never called the police. When Ozzy Osbourne died on July 22, 2025, Pat Boone was one of the first to speak. He called himself stunned. He said they were never comparing rock star careers across the fence, they were just neighbors getting along fine. He remembered Ozzy not as the Prince of Darkness but as a Prince of Kindness. That tribute landed everywhere. And it showed something about Pat Boone that his clean-cut image never fully captured. He was always more complicated, more human, and more generous than the package suggested. Through all of it, Shirley remained the constant. She was a recording artist, a television host, a writer, and the driving force behind major philanthropic work. She played a key role in founding the Save the Refugee Fund during the Cambodian crisis, which eventually grew into Mercy Corps, today one of the world's most recognized humanitarian organizations. She and Pat later established the Pat Boone Family Life Center in Loiborsoit, Tanzania, building a deep water well, a school, and what is now known as the Shirley Boone Vegetable Garden, which still feeds multiple villages today. In March 2025, Pat Boone released One, Voices for Tanzania, a charity anthem following in the tradition of We Are the World, featuring Vince Gill, Lee Greenwood, Alabama, and a choir of Tanzanian refugees singing in Swahili. The song debuted on the Billboard Adult Contemporary chart in April. He said what mattered most was not the chart position. What mattered was clean water for children who had none. That dedication to Tanzania did not come from a press release. It came from a promise made with Shirley. In January 2019, Shirley Boone was diagnosed with vasculitis, an inflammatory disease that attacks blood vessels and can damage organs quickly. She died at home in Beverly Hills on January 11, 2019, at the age of 84. Pat and their daughters were beside her, singing hymns. The marriage had lasted 65 years. He later said he missed her in the simplest words he could find. Not polished. Not rehearsed. Just true. He stayed in the same Beverly Hills home, now quieter, now holding memory instead of conversation. His daughters drew closer around the space she left. And he kept moving, because that is what she would have expected. In September 2025, Pat Boone stepped onto a stage in St. Charles, Illinois, joining Debbie for a special evening billed as a father and daughter legacy of songs and stories. He joked beforehand that someone had given him a gadget that says no, 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 and said he had been using it constantly until Debbie called. Then he said yes without hesitating. At 91, he is still showing up. Still charting. Still singing. Still building wells in Tanzania in Shirley's name. The house is quieter than it used to be. But the man inside it has never stopped moving toward the things that mattered to the woman he loved.